I am Dr. Renee Threlfall. I'm a research scientist in the Food Science Department at the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. I'm going to talk to you today about the protocols for collecting grape samples with a focus on muscadine grapes. We're going to talk about grape chemistry, sampling supplies, sampling procedures, and sample analysis. Let's go on to grape chemistry. Chemistry for grape and wine production. There are some key elements that we're looking for. The first one is soluble solids. Sometimes you'll see that referred to as SS or Brix. These measurements are very similar. Basically, they are a measure of the percent sugar content of a solution when the sugar is the major component. And of course, grapes, in terms of grapes, it is one of the major components. pH is a measure of acidity or alkalinity on a scale of 0 to 14. pH of 7 is neutral, which would be an example of a pH 7 liquid would be water. Less than 7 is an acid, so something like vinegar would have a pH of about 2 or 3. And above 7 is alkaline, and those would be things that are kind of basic, like baking soda and ammonium and bleach. And then we have titratable acidity, and that is the measure of the predominant acid in the solution. In terms of grapes, what we're looking for is tartaric acid. So grape chemistry standards vary by cultivar, but also vary by the type of grape that we're looking for. So in wine grapes, some of the parameters that we're looking for is something 20 to 25% sugar, with a pH of about 3.2 to 3.5. So we want to have a nice balance of sugar and some acid for the fermentation of grapes into wine. For muscadine grapes, the parameters shift a little bit because muscadines will typically have a soluble solids between 15 and 20% and a pH of 3 to 3.5, but they're also notorious for having pHs lower than 3.0 as well. So one of the other things that you have to realize about grapes as a grower is that sometimes you have to harvest early if the fruit quality declines. So although we want to have this optimum conditions, sometimes you have to make a decision. If it's raining or there's pest or disease issues or the vines are stressed, then we may have to harvest early and make our adjustments as needed in the winemaking or juice making process. Sampling supplies. If you're growing grapes or making wine or juice, you need to have a refractometer, a pH meter, and then the ability to measure the titratable acidity. So some of the things that you would need to measure the titratable acidity would be a pH meter, which you already have, a burette, a stir plate, and some sodium hydroxide. And you can, we can have you can email me if you have questions about how exactly to measure the titratable acidity, or you can look it up online. Other supplies that come in handy for sampling are zip-type freezer bags or some type of storage bag, some beakers or plastic cups, distilled water, paper towels, and disposable pipettes. So in terms of soluble solids, we are going to be measuring soluble solids through a refractometer. So what is a refractometer and how does it work? You can see on the image here a picture of a glass with a straw, and it looks like the straw is broken. So light passing through liquid is slowed compared to the speed it travels in air. So you can see that in the image that the straw looks like it's displaced because you're looking at it through a liquid versus looking at it through air. So when juice is placed on the measuring surface of a refractometer, the light passing through slows and is bent. The refractometer focuses on this bent light on a tiny internal scale, and the scale is magnified in the eyepiece lens so it's visible. Using a handheld refractometer. So the first thing you want to do is possibly place a drop of juice on the measuring surface of the refractometer like you see in the upper image. Close the portal and look through the eyepiece. Read the scale where the contrast line, the difference between the light and the dark area, crosses in the scale. And you can see on that bottom image where the light and dark areas meet is the line where you want to be reading. You want to be sure to rinse the measuring surface of the refractometer with water and dry it with a soft paper towel between each measurement. Now the sampling procedure. When do we sample our grapes? So what we like to do for a commercial growing operation is to have 3 to 4 sampling dates before harvest. That way you have an idea of when the harvest might occur. So the first sampling date will be at veraison, or veraison, and that is when the berries start to soften and the berry skin changes color from green to either that yellow or kind of reddish black color that you would see in a muscadine. Then you want to follow up 2 to 3 weeks before expected harvest, and then 1 week before harvest, and then 2 days before harvest. And that way you have an idea of tracking. This sampling is also very handy to have to keep in our historical records for our vineyards so that we have an idea of how each plots differ from each other and can time our harvest better. Early sampling grapes. So what do you want to do when you are sampling grapes? You want to walk randomly in a vineyard to sample the grapes. You want to collect 1 berry from a grape cluster on a vine, squeeze some juice on the refractometer, and take a measurement, and then repeat that 10 or more times at different locations in the vineyard and from berries within different parts of the canopy. You want to record the average of the soluble solids level and sample date for that vineyard or that block. And different blocks can have different chemistries, so you want to make sure that you're within the same block. So as you're getting closer to harvest, you want to change the way you sample that. You want to take more fruit. So as you are harvest sampling grapes, you want to collect 100 to 200 berries for analysis. With muscadines, I think you could get away with about 50 berries. So start sampling near the beginning of each row. So collect 10 to 25 berries for each side of a row. And this depends on how many rows you have. So just think about how many rows you have and how many berries you need to get, the 100 to 200 berries. Now, typically on a wine grape, what I would recommend was that you select a berry from the shoulder of a cluster, then the next time you sample from the middle of the cluster, and the next time you sample from the tip of the cluster. And muscadine clusters are smaller than a wine grape cluster, but they still have different areas. So you definitely want to vary the location on the cluster so that you are getting berries from different sides in the sun and the shade. So you'll repeat the same 3 berrying sampling procedures. So you take a number of steps between the sampling zones. It's really based on the row length. So you're going to take X number of steps and sample again, and X number of steps and sample again. It really depends on how long the row is, how many rows you have, and so on. And you want to vary these locations of the clusters on the vine and select berries from both the front and the back of the cluster. So you will also want to make sure that you're not just harvesting berries that are out in the sun, because those are going to be riper than the berries that are in the shade. My experience with harvest sampling is that even when you do a really good job, that typically it overprotects the soluble solids by about 1 to 2%. So if it's, let's say it's like 20%, when you actually harvest everything, it'll be about 18%. So keep that in mind, that harvest sampling, even when you do a really good job, tends to overestimate the soluble solids just a little. You want to collect the berry samples in like a zip type freezer bag, just something disposable that's easy to label. Be sure to label the bag with the cultivar and plot name, and maybe the sample date of the date you're sampling these vines. And then you want to do sample analysis. So seal the bag of grapes, gently squeeze the grapes from the outside of the bag. So the grapes are on the inside of the bag, and you just squeeze the grapes to extract the juice. Until you think they're juiced enough. Unseal the bag and pour the juice into a beaker or cup. Now, when you're measuring the juice chemistry, make sure the juice is at room temperature. This is very important because refractometers and pH measurements are very sensitive to the temperature. So make sure that the juice is at room temperature, and it's not very cold and it's not very hot, so more like room temperature. Place a drop of the juice on the refractometer and measure the soluble solids. And then take the juice and place a pH probe into the juice to measure the pH. Be sure that you are following the instructions on your pH meter and that you are calibrating your pH meter regularly. So in conclusion, grape growers should keep records of grape chemistry and sampling to plan future harvests. And we all know that the quality of wine is made in the vineyard. And I want to thank you for your attention today, and please reach out to me if you have any questions.